Good day, everybody. This is Jerry from Rhapsody Tours. Well, today I'm going to spend a little time talking about some of the passengers that were on the luxury liner Titanic and the class system. And I'll get into a few individual stories as well. When Titanic sailed from Queenstown, Ireland, today known as Cove, there were approximately 2,220 people on board. She departed originally from Southampton and was on her way to New York City. The Titanic passengers were divided into three separate classes, and this was determined not only by the price of the ticket, but also by the wealth and the social class. The class system was very important back then. For those traveling in first class, the wealthiest passengers on board were prominent members of upper class and included businessmen, politicians, industrialists, high-ranking military personnel, bankers, professional athletes. The second-class passengers were middle-class travelers, and they included professors, authors, clergymen, and tourists. Third-class or steerage passengers were primarily immigrants moving to the United States and Canada. The Titanic's first-class passenger list was a who's who of the wealthy and prominent of upper class in 1912. A single-person berth in first class cost $47. Today that would be equivalent to approximately $3,437, and that went up to $1,360, which today, it would be close today to $99,700. And this would give you a parlor suite and a small private promenade deck. First-class passengers enjoyed a number of amenities, including a gymnasium, a squash court, a saltwater swimming pool, both an electric and Turkish baths, barbershop, kennels for your dog, you obviously needed a kennel for your dog, elevators, and both open and enclosed promenades, areas for walking. First-class passengers also traveled with their personal staff, valets, maids, nurses for the children, chauffeurs, and cooks. Some of the most prominent members of American social elite who made the trip included Colonel John Jacob Astor IV and his 18-year-old pregnant wife, Madeline. They were returning to the United States for their child's birth. Industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, Macy department store founder Isidore Straus and his wife, Ida, Pennsylvania Railroad executive John Thayer, Charles Hayes, President of Canada's Grand Trunk Railway, Denver millionaire and women's rights activist Margaret Brown, or better known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, silent film actress Dorothy Gibson, President Taft's military aide, Major Archibald Butt. He was returning to resume his duties after a 6-week trip to Europe. The White Star's managing director and chairman, Bruce Ismay, was on the ship, as well as the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. One gentleman who did not make the trip, canceling at the last moment, was J.P. Morgan. Second-class passengers were primarily leisure tourists, academics, members of the clergy, middle-class English and American families. Although employed as crew members, the ship's band also had second-class accommodations. The average ticket price for a second-class adult passenger was $21. Or the equivalent in today's currency would be $1,490. These figures are all in US dollar, by the way. Now, for many of these passengers, their travel experience on Titanic would be just like traveling first class on smaller liners. Second-class passengers had their own library. The band had access to a private smoking room. Second-class children could read books from their own library or play shuffleboard up on the second-class promenade. Now, some of the passengers who traveled to second class included schoolteacher Lawrence Beesley, a science master who spent much of his time on board ship in the library. 2 months after the sinking, he wrote and published The Loss of the SS Titanic, the first eyewitness account of the disaster. Another second-class family that was traveling was a French family, and they were actually traveling incognito. It was Michel Navratil. He was a French tailor who had kidnapped his 2 young sons, Michel Jr. and Edmund, from his estranged wife, and was traveling under an alias, hoping to take them to the United States. When Michael Sr. died and the boys arrived in New York, nobody knew who they were. So a photograph was taken and circulated all over the world in hopes that somebody would recognize the two Titanic orphans. Eventually their mother saw the picture and arrived in New York to pick up the boys. But the story didn't end there. I had the honor of spending time with Michelle in 1996, and I heard in a lot more detail the rest of the story. And if you're interested in hearing this incredible story, visit our Facebook page, Ireland, the Birthplace of Titanic, and click on the Titanic My Touch with History picture on the top banner. Third class, or steerage passengers, were primarily immigrants, and they were all hoping to start new lives in the United States or Canada. The price range varied quite a bit for their tickets. A third-class passenger could pay between $11 and $14, which would be anywhere from $800 to $1,100 today, and this would depend on their place of origin. Ticket prices often included the price of rail travel. Ticket prices for children would start at $5, which would be almost $345 today. Third-class passengers were a diverse group of nationalities and ethnic groups. In addition to a large number of British, Irish, and Scandinavian immigrants, there were passengers from Central and Eastern Europe, like Bulgaria, Croatia, Russia, the Middle East, Libya, Syria, Hong Kong, and some Armenians actually fleeing from Turkey. Some traveled alone or in small groups. Several groups of mothers would be traveling along with their young children, most going to join their husbands who had already gone to America to find work and had saved up enough money so he could send for the rest of the family. Large families were common. John and Annie Sage were immigrating to Jacksonville, Florida with their 9 children, ranging in age from 4 to 20 years old. Anders and Alfreda Andersson of Sweden had their 5 children and were traveling to Canada, along with Alfreda's younger sister Anna and husband Ernst and baby Gilbert. Frederick Goodwin was moving with his wife Augusta and their 6 children to his new job at a power plant in New York. There was Mrs. William Rice, born in Ireland. When she was 19, she married Bill Rice, and he became a clerk with the Grand Trunk Railroad, and they moved to Montreal after the birth of their first child. Their first child choked to death on a dummy pacifier after they had settled in Canada. The family moved from Montreal to Spokane, Washington, where William was to work with the Great Northern Railroad as a machinist. Their youngest son was born. In 1910, William Rice was killed in a train accident. His widow collected a substantial insurance settlement and returned to Ireland with the boys, there to grieve with the rest of the family. In 1912, she decided to move back to Spokane with the family, her 4 sons, and they booked passage on Titanic and boarded in Queenstown, Ireland, today known as Cove. After the collision, third-class passenger Bertha Melville saw Margaret Rice in the third-class area holding Eugene, with the rest of her children holding her skirt. The Sages, Andersons, Goodwins, and Rices all perished in the sinking. The youngest passenger on board was 2 months old, Malvina Dean, who with her parents and older brother were immigrating from England to Kansas. She was the last of the Titanic survivors to have passed away. So I have told you the fate of some of the second class and steerage class passengers. But how did first class make out? Now I mentioned in an earlier video that wealth and social status did have some bearing on some of the passengers, and they were able to get themselves onto a lifeboat. But that was not the case for all of them. Now I mentioned John Jacob Astor was on board, the wealthiest man on the ship. He was there with his pregnant wife Madeline, and he brought her to the lifeboat. It is reported that he told her not to worry and that he would see her soon. John Jacob Astor was last seen standing on the starboard bridge wing, smoking a cigarette. Benjamin Guggenheim loved to travel, and he was very happily taking Titanic's maiden voyage with, among others, his valet Victor and his mistress. He had slept through the hitting of the iceberg, and he had no idea it had happened. He had to be persuaded to awaken and get dressed. He took his mistress up to the boat deck and managed to get her onto lifeboat number 9. He told her they would see each other soon. It was just a repair. Tomorrow the Titanic will go again. After the lifeboat was launched, he realized the situation was much more than he had thought. So he, and Victor made their way back to the room, dressed up in their evening wear, and then were heading into the grand staircase when it was heard him remark, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go like gentlemen." He also gave his survivor a message saying, "To my wife, if it should happen that my secretary and I both go down, tell her I played the game out straight to the end. No woman shall be left on board the ship because Ben Guggenheim was a coward." Ida and Isidore Strauss, on their way back to New York, were standing up on the boat deck. Isidore was about to help Ida into the lifeboat, the half-full lifeboat, and it was indicated that young men in the area would not be able to go, so Isidore decided he would not step in their place. Ida stood up, extended her hand, and said, "We have spent the last 40 years of our life together. I will not spend the rest of my life without you. As we have lived, so will we die together." She stepped out of the boat. She took off her fur wrap, wrapped it around her maid, and said, "It'll be cold out there. You will need it more than I." They were last seen sitting in deck chairs, holding hands. Wealthy or poor, young or old, the sinking of Titanic on April 15, 1912 had an impact not only on the families and loved ones of those who perished that night and the survivors, but for countless generations all over the world the last 100 years. Now, if you're interested in staying in touch about events leading into the 100th anniversary, or to find out information about Ireland, the birthplace of Titanic Tour, visit us at www.rhapsodytours.net. That's RHAPSODY tours.net. Or you can reach us on Facebook on the Ireland, the Birthplace of Titanic page, and on Twitter at Rhapsody Tours. If you have any comments, we'd love to see them. In our next video, we'll take a look at the cause of the sinking of Titanic. Until then, have a wonderful day.